Claws crushed the grass. Lions stalked forward, muscles coiled, eyes locked on their target. At the center of their slow, silent circle lay something no one could explain, a bear cub. It wasn't possible. Bears didn't live here. Not in this sun-scorched stretch of Africa. But there it was, curled, panting, trembling. Dust clung to its fur. Blood streaked one paw. No mother. No herd. Nothing between it and the kingly jaws, moving closer by the second. The largest lion lowered its head, ears forward, teeth flashing beneath a golden mane. Another flanked wide. The cub didn't run. It couldn't. Its legs had given out miles ago. Somewhere beyond the rise, vultures waited. Nature knew how the story ended. But then something shifted. A high screech cut across the wind. Leaves rustled. Shadows moved in the trees. Not lions this time. Something else. Watching. Stirring. And the lions, kings of this land, hesitated. Because even in the wild, not all rules are written in hunger. And sometimes, even the most ruthless hunters look into the eyes of a creature too small to fight. And something ancient stirs. Not pity. Not mercy. Something deeper. This was not a mistake of geography. This was nature's pause button. And before the next move could be made, the plains themselves began to respond. Because the wild doesn't always follow its script. And this cub wasn't done yet. The cub had no name. It had been taken from its mother too early, stuffed inside a crate that smelled of rust and gasoline, and loaded onto a plane bound for a life it was never meant to live. No forest. No snow. No soft silence of the pines. Instead, its journey had been hijacked by greed, part of a secret wildlife trade route that moved rare animals like cargo, far from the eyes of law and compassion. Somewhere over the African continent, a mechanical failure turned that plan into chaos. The plane went down. Fire swallowed metal. Crates burst open. And from the wreckage, the cub crawled out alone. For hours it wandered, dazed and limping, across a landscape that made no sense. The ground was too dry, the air too hot, the smells too sharp. There were no familiar trees to hide beneath, no cold stream to drink from, just tall grass that whispered of predators, and a sky that never let go of the sun. Every step forward was met with new eyes watching from the brush. Antelope paused mid-graze. A jackal followed for a while and then vanished. Birds circled overhead, curious if it was dead or just dying. The cub didn't know where it was or what waited beyond the next rise. All it knew was that the forest was gone. The world had changed overnight, and now it was just a heartbeat in the wrong place, caught between survival and a silence that threatened to swallow it whole. They moved like wind through grass, quiet but absolute. For brothers, born into power, raised by the hunt, feared across every corner of their territory. This stretch of land belonged to them, etched by their scent, guarded by their scars, and ruled by a bond thicker than blood. The sun was just beginning to soften when one of them lifted his head and paused mid-step. Something was wrong. The scent hit them all at once. It wasn't antelope or buffalo. It wasn't even hyena. It was something else, something off. Not from here. Foreign. Their pace slowed, then shifted. No longer walking. Now stalking. Eyes narrowed. Shoulders lowered. Muscles tense beneath golden fur. They followed the trail across a slope and into a field where the grass had been flattened by something small and stumbling. And then, just ahead, they saw it. A mound of soft fur curled near a dry patch of earth. Not prey. Not predator. Just wrong. A creature out of place. The brothers didn't charge. They approached with the quiet certainty of creatures who had nothing to fear. One walked wide. The other two split left and right, their path forming a tightening noose around the cub. Ears flicked. Tails twitched. Their language was one of glances and position. The circle shrank with every silent step. Still, the cub didn't move. It lifted its head barely. One paw dragged in the dirt. It was too tired to understand the danger. Too far gone to run. The lions came closer, not in rage but in calculation. They weren't sure what it was, but they would know soon enough whether it bled, whether it screamed, whether it mattered. The savannah waited with bated breath, and the hunt, if this was a hunt, was nearly complete. The moment the cub tried to move, the lions reacted. Not with violence, not yet, but with sudden precision. One twitched its ear and adjusted position. Another paused mid-step. The cub had lifted its head, tried to push itself upright on trembling legs, and then collapsed again. The sound that followed wasn't a roar or growl. It was a high, desperate whimper, thin, sharp, and wrong for this place. The air seemed to catch it and hold it still, as if confused about what to do with such a sound. The lions came closer. Their eyes didn't just see. They read, measured, and judged. This wasn't the dance they knew. There was no chase, no challenge, just a soft thing in the dirt that didn't even try to fight. One lion, the oldest and largest, stepped forward, nostrils flaring. He leaned in close and sniffed the cub's side, then pulled back. Something about the scent made his body stiffen. It was not fear. It was recognition of something unfamiliar and out of place. He did not strike. He simply watched. The other three began to shift uneasily, circling tighter. Their instincts urged them forward. A lone, helpless animal meant food, meant dominance, meant survival. But their leader held back. The cub, unaware of the mercy being measured around it, closed its eyes. There was a stillness then, deep and unnatural. Even the birds in the trees seemed to stop. Grass swayed, but nothing else moved. For a moment, it was as if the land itself had paused to decide whether to keep writing its usual story, or begin a new one. And in that pause, something ancient flickered in the lion's gaze. Not fear, not pity, something else, something that made them wait. From the edge of the tree line, hidden among the dense branches and tangled leaves, a troop of olive baboons watched in rigid silence. They had seen this ritual before, lion stalking, surrounding, claiming what they believed was theirs. Death was part of the savannah's rhythm. And yet, something about this scene didn't fit. The creature in the center of the lion's circle wasn't a local. It didn't belong to the dance. Its cry had pierced the trees like a foreign wind, rattling something deeper than instinct. Among the baboons, one female shifted forward. She was large for her kind, scarred from old battles, and usually the first to retreat when danger came. But now she didn't run. She screamed, a shrill, aggressive note that shattered the stillness and burst from the underbrush, charging straight toward the lions. Her call acted like a match to dry grass. Dozens of baboons erupted behind her, leaping from trees and scrambling through the brush. They didn't just scream. They fought. Sticks flew. Stones cracked against lion shoulders. One young male latched onto a lion's tail and yanked hard before vaulting back into the grass. The lions recoiled, not from injury, but from confusion. They'd seen aggression. They'd seen defense. But this wasn't that. This was fury born from empathy, the kind that didn't fit into the laws of predator and prey. Within moments, a chaotic wall of shrieking, screeching primates had wedged itself between the cub and the circle of lions. It wasn't strategy. It was something older, something louder than fear. The baboons didn't know what the cub was or why it mattered, only that it needed them. And without hesitation, they answered a call that wasn't theirs as if it had always been. The air fractured under the weight of noise. Screeches tore through the field, rising above the grunts of lions and the shrill whistles of baboons swinging and lunging in flashes of fur and teeth. One lion growled deep in its throat and lashed out, its paw swiping wide and fast. It caught nothing. The moment it moved, 5 baboons pounced from different directions, throwing rocks, biting, pulling, vanishing again into the cover of grass and trees. The lions weren't scared. Not truly. But they were overwhelmed. Their dominance, so rarely challenged, now met a force that didn't match the natural order. They were predators. They weren't supposed to be the ones pushed back. Yet they were. Not by strength, not by teeth, but by a storm of creatures who had no reason to fight, and every reason not to. In the center of it all, the cub hadn't moved. Its eyes stayed wide, its small chest rising in shallow bursts. It was surrounded, but not protected. It was helpless and somehow being defended by a world that had no reason to care. Instinct said this moment should end with blood, but instinct was no longer in charge. The lions, sensing the fracture in this moment, slowly began to pull away. No growls, no charge, just steps backward, heads high but eyes wary. They retreated not from fear, but from something even older, confusion in the face of mercy. They could kill, but they chose not to. Nature, for a heartbeat, rewrote itself, not with words, but with restraint. And in that restraint, a rule broke, the kind that says only the strong decide who lives. Today, something else decided. Something silent, invisible, but unshakable. The wild had blinked, and in that blink, the cub was still alive. Out beyond the baboons, beyond the churned grass and fractured silence, the trees shifted. Not in panic, in purpose. A low rustle moved through the underbrush, like breath drawn deep. Then came a sound unlike the rest, slow, heavy, deliberate. A shape emerged from the green, larger than anything else on the field, its presence slowing everything around it. She was a sloth bear, old and broad-shouldered, her fur matted in places, her gait unhurried but sure. She didn't run. She didn't roar. She walked forward, one paw after the other, each step deliberate and silent as fog rolling over a river. Her eyes scanned the chaos, but she didn't look confused. She looked like she belonged there, like she had waited for this moment without knowing it would come. She made her way past the baboons, who parted instinctively. The lions, now distant, watched with ears forward, puzzled by this new player, who offered no challenge yet commanded presence. When she reached the cub, she stopped. She didn't touch it. She didn't make a sound. She simply stood between it and everything else, a wall of muscle, age, and quiet resolve. Years ago, she had escaped a roadside zoo in the north, vanishing into the wild before anyone could track her. There had been rumors, sightings, but never confirmation. Some believed she had died. Others thought she had adapted in the shadows. And maybe, when the cub's cry split the wind, it stirred something inside her. Memory. Instinct. Something more. Now the cub wasn't alone. Not anymore. In a land where it had no business surviving, something had come for it. Not to carry it away. Not to conquer or comfort. But simply to stand. To say, in a language no one teaches, I am here. You are not forgotten. It was a ripple on the motion sensors that caught their attention first. A burst of activity too dense to be wind and too scattered to be a single animal. The team of conservation rangers stationed miles away was used to alerts from elephants or antelope, sometimes even the odd leopard. But this pattern was different. Chaotic. Focused. Something was happening. They moved fast, guided by GPS tags and instinct, cutting across brush and creek beds until they reached the edge of the disturbance. What they saw brought them to a silent halt. The baboons had started to retreat into the trees, their job seemingly done. The lions were gone, distant silhouettes pacing away across the horizon. But what held the team's gaze was the scene left behind. A bear cub curled in the grass, blinking up at the sky, and beside it, an enormous sloth bear sitting as still as stone. The lead ranger, Amina, crouched low, her mind racing. She remembered the story. A sloth bear stolen from a regional zoo transport nearly 7 years ago. They'd never found her. Some assumed poachers had taken her. Others figured she perished. But now, here she was, alive and somehow standing guard over a cub that didn't even belong on this continent. They marked the coordinates, pulled out satellite maps, and began to trace the wreckage, the suspected flight path, the migration patterns. And somehow, it all connected. A chain of broken boundaries and unspoken resilience that had led to this impossible encounter. This wasn't just about wildlife anymore. This was a moment where science met something it couldn't explain. Amina looked at her team and knew they weren't just here to observe. They had stepped into a story where nature had bent its own laws. The next chapter would depend on them. They could have brought the tranquilizers. It would have been standard protocol. One dart to the flank, a controlled descent into sleep, and a clean extraction. But Amina knew better. This wasn't a standard situation. The older bear had spent years surviving outside every system, every enclosure, every rule. A dart wouldn't just drop her. It could make her panic, lash out, flee into the wilderness with the cub following and disappearing for good. The risk was too high. So Amina made a different call. She told her team to back off. They left food at a distance. Quietly. Fresh fruit. Clean water. They set up blinds and watched from far enough to be forgotten. No sounds, no movement, just presence. And then they waited. Hours bled into days. The cub ate first, encouraged by hunger and innocence. The older bear took longer. She watched everything, the trees, the shadows, even the sky, before inching forward to sniff at the offerings. But she never lost her posture. Always upright, always ready. By the fourth day, Amina stepped out from behind the blind. Slowly. No gear. No threat. Just herself. The older bear looked at her, held that gaze for a long, breathless moment, and then nothing. No growl. No retreat. Just a blink. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. The message was clear, unspoken, undeniable. I see you. I don't fear you. Not today. Amina didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Sometimes, trust doesn't come with a leash. It comes with stillness, with not pushing when the wild already knows how to speak. And in that fragile exchange, a choice had been made, not by humans, not by force, but by something older than both. Respect, recognition, the beginning of something gently earned. The journey to the sanctuary was quiet. The cub lay nestled in the back of a modified transport vehicle, swaddled in warmth and calm, unaware that its world was changing once again. The road carved through hills and across riverbeds, leading to a place designed not to hold animals, but to heal them, a sanctuary carved out of understanding rather than control. Its zones were tailored to mimic distant lands, complete with pine-scented soil, cool shaded groves, and rock shelters dusted with snow through fine mist systems. The female bear did not ride in the vehicle. She followed from a distance, untracked, unhindered. The team didn't try to coax her. They simply let her choose. And she did, step by step, as though she understood that this place was not a prison, but a door. When they arrived, the cub was gently released into a transitional enclosure. It sniffed the air, blinked against the artificial snowflakes falling from above, and slowly began to explore. The female bear stayed beyond the perimeter fence, just inside the tree line, unmoving for hours. She watched. The gate was left open. No sounds, no shouts, just an opening, an invitation. At dusk, she stepped forward, not in haste, not in fear. She crossed the threshold as if returning to something long lost, not discovering something new. And when the gate gently closed behind her, no one celebrated. No one cheered. They only watched as she walked toward the cub and settled beside it, her body lowering with a long exhale of breath that sounded like relief. This wasn't a capture. It was something quieter, a recognition, a crossing back into connection, not of mother and child, not even of species, but of two beings who had been misplaced, now finally placed again, side by side, where they were needed most. 1 year later, the cub no longer looked fragile. Its coat had thickened, its muscles filled out, and its steps carried the quiet confidence of survival earned. It no longer trembled at strange sounds or shied away from shadows. It roamed the wide enclosure freely, climbed rocks, foraged instinctively, and splashed in the artificial streams designed to mimic a home it had never known. Nearby, the older bear remained, slower now, her steps more deliberate, her fur streaked with time. But she stayed close, not as a guardian, not as a mother, just as something constant. They often sat together in the mornings, shoulder to shoulder beneath the slant of early light. No movement, no purpose, just stillness, as if remembering demanded silence. Outside the sanctuary, the world had shifted too. The lions never came back to that clearing. Rangers say the pride moved on, as if they'd sensed something sacred had taken root in the soil they once ruled. The baboons still lived nearby, their numbers growing, their paths now watched with a quiet respect. Nothing had been forgotten, not by the animals, not by the land. In the vast rhythm of the wild, moments like this rarely survive. But somehow this one did. The wild didn't forget what it saw that day. It adapted. It remembered. And beneath the sky that once watched 4 lions circle a trembling cub, 2 bears now rested in peace. Not just because they were rescued, but because something older than instinct chose to let them be. This was never just a story about the food chain. It was never about the lion's hunger or the cub's helplessness. This was about something deeper, something that stirred beneath the surface of instinct and rewrote it without a sound. A bear cub, dropped into the wrong world, should have been forgotten by it, but instead the wild made space. The lions, masters of this land, stepped back. The baboons, ruled by fear for generations, stood forward. And an old bear, scarred and lost from another lifetime, answered a call that no one else heard. Survival, in its purest form, is not always won by power. It's not just claws and fangs and the strength to endure. Sometimes it's a pause, a choice, a moment where the stronger steps aside and the weaker is allowed to breathe. And in that breath, a new kind of survival is born, one rooted not in dominance, but in something far more fragile and far more lasting. The cub didn't survive because it fought harder. It survived because nature, for once, chose to listen, to step out of character, to rewrite a single rule in the middle of a quiet field where no one was watching, except the trees, the sky, and a few creatures who decided that mercy was stronger than instinct. And in that moment, the wild didn't just protect a life, it revealed its soul. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you real, untold stories from the edge of the wild, where instincts shift, boundaries blur, and nature reminds us that compassion isn't just a human trait. Every like, comment, and share helps us tell more stories that deserve to be remembered, and helps protect the voices that cannot speak for themselves. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop listening for the moments when the wild chooses wonder over war.